If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniac. Hello everyone, happy Christmas. I hope you're all having a great day. Here's 5 of the most scary Skinwalker stories I found for you all, because I know how much everyone loves Skinwalker stories. I love narrating them, they're really some of my favourites too. I'm going to keep doing Skinwalker stories because how much I enjoy them. So with that, I hope you're all having a great day. Let's begin. Growing up in the central US, I've heard all of the myths and legends about Skinwalkers. I never really gave them any merit up until last week. I've also heard that talking or thinking about them can draw them in, but I gotta tell someone. Please excuse any formatting errors. And this is my first post I'm on mobile. So let me start with some background. My name's Dakota. I'm 26 and have grown up in and around the Southern Rockies and the Superstition Mountains and all of the vast wilderness that is Colorado, Utah, Arizona and New Mexico. All my life I've been drawn to the outdoors, hiking, climbing, biking, rafting, kayaking. You name it, I've done it. I'm very experienced in all these activities and have worked as a guide and survival instructor since 19. I've experienced many strange, possibly paranormal things due to my time in the wilderness, but I'm rambling. So anyway, last Friday, I took some time off for myself, just to get back in tune with the solitude of nature. I packed all my gear, finished going through my checklist, and made sure to let some of the other guides know where I was heading when I'd be back. Then I loaded my gear into my 4-wheeler, made sure my bear, my very sweet and loyal overprotective German Shepherd, was comfy in the passenger seat. He is my lookout, adventure partner and best friend. He never leaves my side, even to the point when I have to use the bathroom. So we set out shortly after 11 AM towards a canyon I'd recently discovered hidden away behind the thick bush and at an apparent rock side. After about 5 hours of driving through the dusty and desolate landscape, the trails continue on between a narrow passage through the mountainous cliffs. When we arrive, I parked the 4-wheeler behind a large outcropping of boulders, took the keys, and covered it with a colour. Not that I was worried about theft. I was probably miles away from the nearest human. I covered it to keep the unforgiving sun to prevent any melting damage. After getting the 4-wheeler stashed away, I adorned my pack and my sidearm, a large caliber Desert Eagle. There aren't many animals that you can kill out here, but I had the gun for protection. I surveyed the area. There was thick bush and dry foliage all around us with small foot trails. I cleared them on the 4-wheeler and see a large rock pile in front of us. I skirted around the rocks to the very narrow passage in behind the left side. It's a tight squeeze, and I had to remove my pack just to get through it. Now I had to slide and shuffle like this for about 20 feet, with cold jagged rocks against my chest and loose boulders against my back. The trail narrowed near the end, and I had to suck my chest in and wriggle my way out in a large opening in the rocks, where Bear happily waited for me with his head cocked to the side with confusion. He was confused why I struggled so much and he passed so easily. When I finally freed myself from the narrow rock, my jaw dropped. all around me. The cliff is covered in ancient paintings and carvings, some of which I recognize from some Native American sites used as religious sites. But many of these symbols were new to me. The most notable was a large painting near where the trail continued on. It depicted a large figure whose head and antlers resembled that of a deer, but the body was long and narrow, strangest of all, bipedal. It is at times like these that I wish I'd brought some piece of technology like my iPhone, but I usually leave it at home, bring in only an emergency satellite phone. Intrigued, I left the opening and headed on the trail. I was surprised by the steep downward slope that seemed to be heading down further and further into the earth, and I was even more surprised when the trail ended at the mouth of a large cave. It's actually a cave that I didn't know about. This couldn't get any better. I set down my pack, pulled out my flashlight. It was getting pretty dark, so I figured I'd just check out the opening, then settle for the night. I wandered in a few feet and abruptly stopped when the floor dropped down into a chasm. My flashlight barely penetrated the dark abyss below me. Disappointed that I'd need to return another day with my caving gear and possibly a partner, I headed back towards the mouth of the cave, and Bear, who had strangely stayed put, didn't follow me in. He must be tired, I thought, as I suddenly started to realise my own fatigue after nearly 5 hours of driving and 5 of hiking. I started a small fire with some newspaper logs I packed, in which burned for a surprisingly long time. I heated up some water for some dehydrated omelette. After a not very satisfying meal, I unroll my sleeping bag and get comfortable, with the fire by my side and the distant view of the stars peeking between the distant cliff tops that shelter me from the rest of the world. With that peaceful thought, I dozed off to the sound of the crackling fire and Bear snoring beside me. I sleepily checked my watch when I was nudged awake. It's almost 3 in the morning. I softly push Bear's head away from me, nudging me so I can go back to sleep. But that's when, in the dim of the fire, I see that his teeth are now bared, his head low beside me in a protective position. He was starting towards the mouth of the cave with a deep growl emanating from his throat. More alert now, I clumsily grabbed my flashlight and unholstered my pistol, my finger ready to switch off the safety. I mentioned to Bear to be quiet, which was a very handy skill that had taken a lot of time to learn. On command, he quieted, but still snarling at the dark hole in the cliff, I illuminate the edge of the drop-off, my gun aimed with the beam, and we listen. For a few minutes, all I heard besides silence was my heartbeat. Then finally, I heard it. I still can't describe it, but I'll try my best. It sounded like the belt of a goat and the yowl of a wild cat coming together to form words that are broken and foreign. Quiet at first, it's now accompanied by a clacking and scraping sound, getting closer and closer. I strain my eyes to the edge in the light of the beam. What I saw next, I'm sure has been burned into my mind's eyes and I'll never forget it. In the light, there's disgusting long rotten fingers. Something is there up over in the cave. The thing first pulled itself. It's now out of the cave. It's about 6 feet tall, with long deer legs, too skinny to support the weight. The body appeared to be semi-human, but a skeleton draped with rotting flesh, with patches of mangled fur and ribs protruding from its chest. The smell was wretched, and I wanted to look away to vomit and run, but I'm paralyzed with fear. I kept staring at the long curled antlers and the warped and twisted body, long arms hanging loosely in front of the claws scraping the ground, but mostly the disturbing contoured mix of human and animal intertwined to make a face so haunting I remember it to this day. And when it locked into my view, its empty rotted sockets met with my eyes. It lets out some horrifying words. "Let me help you," said very slowly. With that, I snapped out of my paralyzed state, switched off the safety, pulling the trigger twice, then 3 times. In an instant, the horrible thing before me flickered and was 2 feet to the right. I fired again and again, as the thing jerks towards me. Now I really don't remember much of what happened next. Bear barking, us sprinting, flashes of gunfire, the jerking and clanking, the evil voice again. "Let me help you." I just remembered the peak of sunlight, the roar of the side-by-side as me and Bear sped through the desert. We woke up in a shack uninjured, but forever scarred by the experience. It kept me awake every night since, and I needed to tell someone, to warn someone, please. If you ever see carvings or anything in a cave, do not enter.
Hey, leader of the cryptic crew here. Alright, you guys were right. The name is too cheesy. Also, I probably wouldn't be the leader. Casey would. She's got a lot of energy. A few lovely people said they'd like to hear more of our adventures. Thanks for your interest. I've decided to compile a bunch of quick incidents that happened since I moved into my dorm. It's been a busy few weeks, so I can't write much. I've got another 5-page essay due Sunday. First, some background onto my dorm building. It's got a notorious reputation as haunted, and I live in the basement. People call the basement the cryptid zone for 2 reasons. The first reason, just because Joe lives at the end of the hall, and there's quite a few people in on that joke. I swear the closer I got to the door with the nameplate Joe on it, the weirder I feel. The other reason is because of the vibes the basement gives off. The first time I showed Tal my room, they nearly stumbled over. The hallway is long, dark, and artificially lit. If you stared down the hall at night, you start to feel dizzy. That's how long it is. The artificial lighting feels absolutely soul draining, and the basement is always freezing. But that's nothing too abnormal. The real spooky thing is the ghost rumours. I have to admit it now. I've always been a skeptic, never really believing in any supernatural stuff. First night I moved in, I couldn't sleep at all. I moved in 3 weeks earlier than everyone else due to a special program at my university. There was only a handful of other kids living in my building. One other person in the basement with me, and she lives on the opposite end of the hall. That first night was terrifying, and I'm not quite sure why. My thoughts raced through my mind. No matter how many blankets I bunched around myself, I was cold, and I kept hearing things. For the first several hours, I convinced myself it was nothing. The creaks and cracks could be explained by the building's weak structure. The walls were paper thin here. But then I heard crying. I jumped out my bed in fear. The first noise was a nose sniffing. Then I heard a hiccup-like sob. They were so quiet, but not like they were muffled by the walls. It was like someone was trying to be quiet. With a trembling hand, I grabbed a knife and a flashlight from my nightstand. Yeah, I have a knife collection. It seemed like a good idea to bring that with me to protect myself in college. I roll out of bed and head towards the empty side of my room. I turn on my flashlight and scan the room. I wanted to leave, because I'm not going to be that stupid white person from the horror movies. Well, I'm not white, but whatever, you get what I'm saying. But I had nowhere to go, and it was 3:30 AM. I walked over to the walls, and pressed my ear against them. Though my hearing does suck, it's not completely gone. I attempted to listen for several minutes, but I didn't hear anything through the extremely thin walls. I didn't have neighbours yet, but my room was empty besides me, so I had to check. It was the only logical move I could make. After a very scary 30 seconds of searching my little dorm room, I admitted defeat and crawled back into bed. The next day, after meeting new people and attempting to make friends before classes officially started, I brought up the ghost rumours to them. They all said they heard the ghost story too. I asked if anyone heard anything weird, and 2 other people in my building, on the 1st and 3rd floor, said they'd heard something crying. A few days later, more weird stuff happened. We were there early for a special program, so we had homework already. One afternoon, I gave up on my stupid work and left it on my desk before leaving. When I got back 3 hours later, the papers were scattered all around my room and all over the floor. I simply joked about this to my friend, saying, "The ghosts must hate this class too." No, nobody else had the key to my room, and I didn't have a roommate yet, no RA, and no cleaning services. One person dismissed my ghost claims by saying it was just the AC moving the paper. My homework being thrown everywhere happens a few times, and sometimes it wasn't just papers, pens, folders, blinders, and even a protein bar once. I haven't known any cold AC units to be able to move protein bars and books. The morning after one of the first nights I stayed over at Casey's room, she told me something that still terrifies me. We were up pretty late, so when I eventually passed out in her arms, I was out. I can be a heavy sleeper at times. We woke to a phone ringing. My mum had tracked my phone, then freaked out when she noticed I wasn't home. Talk about an embarrassing phone call. One that had to happen over FaceTime because we were both hearing impaired. Her ears are much worse than mine. After I'd taken care of the messy parents itch, all Casey said was, "Sorry you got yelled at. She sounds a bit like a helicopter." When she noticed how embarrassed I was, she reassured me with a kiss, then gasped in realization. I asked what was wrong. "Something really weird happened last night, but..." "What? Am I that bad?" I asked jokingly. She shoots me a look that essentially says, "Shut up, idiot." "Just listen for a second. I don't think you'll believe me, but I don't really have anyone else to tell, and well, it did happen to you." When Casey sounds scared, something must be really bad, so I shut up and listened. "Last night, after you fell asleep, you started talking. Do you talk in your sleep often?" Casey asked, unable to hide her fear in her voice any longer. Unfortunately, I was no help. "No, I never really have. Not to my knowledge at least. And you know how my ex and I used to live together for months? She would have said something." I instantly regretted bringing up my ex with my new girlfriend, but thankfully Casey overlooked it. "Damn," Casey said through gritted teeth. I sat up asking what was wrong. "Okay, well, last night around 3:33, I know because I checked my phone, you started talking in your sleep, but it didn't sound like you." "Casey, what do you mean?" "The accent was different. The voice was deeper. You were saying the weirdest stuff too," Casey tried to explain. "Like what?" I asked. "What did I say?" "You said, 'Where's my bag? I left it on the 3rd floor.' What do you mean you don't know? What hotel is this? Great service." "Seriously, I said that?" I asked, perplexed. I vaguely remembered my dreams from the night before. They had everything to do with Casey, very little to do with a hotel. I told him my dreams had nothing to do with a hotel. "Yeah, you did. A bunch of other weird stuff too. You sounded like you'd been possessed by someone who died in a hotel." Casey's a firm believer in the supernatural, but I shook my head in disbelief. "There's no way. It's not possible." "How else do you explain it?" "We still don't quite know how. The last story I was debating on sharing because it was weird and mildly weird of me to put on the internet, but oh well, here it goes. So 2 days ago, I was exhausted from my early classes, late night studying before. Of course, I went to my dorm room after lunch for a well-deserved nap. Before I passed out, I thought to myself, man, I really should have taken my bra off before getting in bed, but I was too tired to move. I passed out. It was just like that sometimes. When I woke up, my bra was gone, nobody was in the room, and I slept lightly during naps, so I probably would have felt or heard someone. I've never sleepwalked, so I genuinely have no idea what happened to me. So there are those stories that I can think of from the cryptid zone and beyond. Tell me what you think below. Also, I'm thinking about interviewing Joey and posting that next. He's an unusual man, that's for sure. When I asked where he was from when I first met him, he simply said, "I'm from around." He paused, realising he sounded too cryptic. "Around here. See you all next time, unless a ghost gets me."
My grandfather told me a story once, as we sat around a campfire in his backyard, in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon is clear, each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice is raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, I lived outside an Apache reservation with your great-grandfather. He returned from the war, setting about raising cattle. Now, this is on a 100-acre ranch, settled between a mountainside, with dirt good for growing thorn bush and not much else. One night, my mum was sick, and my pa and I took a trip into town, about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed out creek, and some old abandoned farmsteads. A fire sparked and a log crackled, jolting me out of the story. So Pa and I driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember this dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights out of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember too, when the engine began to sputter and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. "God damn it," Pa said, guiding the Ford to one side of the road as it coasted to a halt. "Stay here, son," he says as he steps out into darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelt it. A rotten smell. Strange, I thought. Why could I smell sulfur in the desert? My nose also picked up on some weird rotten tomato smell, almost like one of the dead bloated cattle from the heat. You know, where the crows come and pick holes in the side of them. It was foul and I gagged. My skin began to tingle too, and the back of my neck felt itchy. My face is getting hot. The wind had stopped blowing and hung still and heavy, with the stink filling the cab. "Pa," I called. "Dad." No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt fear in my bones, in my chest. Boy, I tell you, I've never felt anything like it. Not until Vietnam. I lock the door and reach over for my dad's door. I see a shadow bound across the road, through the dim beams of the light, across the partly open doomed hood. My grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco off to the side. He looked passively into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath. "So what happened?" He sighs, a creature, and shakes his head. You have to understand that there were legends, old legends, older than the rocks of these valleys, older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old Injun chiefs and their shams. The Apache, the Hove, and the Cherokee. All of them old tribes and First Peoples, they told tales, old stories about dark Indian magic, a deal made with old spirits, a blood sacrifice to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other and the Spaniards, and later the white men who come for their land. They called them. He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and plodded forward in his towel. Across the fire and the sky and the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun and old mountains. They call them Skinwalkers, shape changers, old warriors resurrected as skinless men, with muscle, walking on deer legs, with the torso of a man, the head of a coyote, but really messed up, with long and malformed snouts, teeth like a bowie knife, long arms, standing 7 foot, even hunched over. They'd got the old cowboys and white riders. They'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like a potato sack. Wily too, and they could change their voice to match a person you might know. Boy, that's what I saw, a big and fast. I don't know what it was, only for a second. It runs across the road, grey and molted, muscles flexing under its legs, hooves clomping on the road, stringy muscle hunched over shoulders, and it turned, looking right into the cab and into my eyes, and I swear, boy, it grinned at me. I sank into my seat in shock, in fear, shaken. I knew death was near. The air was erratic. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree. Charged full with power. I yelled for my dad, but no words come out. I was shaken. As my grandfather told his story, he was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me. Even now, I feel the force of his words. Now the real power of the Skinwalkers was tricky. They could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so they could take others. Not for long, the legend says, maybe an hour before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think getting skinned alive was hell. A minute passes in what felt like a lifetime. 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened and I jerked my head to left, putting my fist up to fend off an attack. "Son, it's me," my dad said, before climbing into his cab. He grasped the steering wheel, pulling himself awkwardly, jerking into the seat. I cringed into the corner looking at him, looking hard. "Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man, treated me and my ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed them in the camps. And now, I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run or die? Is it him or not? Let's go get the medicine for your ma," as he pulls the truck into gear, pulling into the side of the road. Our trip resumed. "I guess it was him after all." I said, "But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom?" "No, boy. I knew because out the window, out of the corner of my eye, I seen that beast running right next to the car, staring at me with them yellowed eyes, grinned mouth, and I saw it hunched and angry, running next to us. I just looked straight forward and floored it. "Son," he said, "don't look at it." That's how I knew, boy.
To be perfectly frank, I hate talking to Greg. My particular line of work was pleasant enough to exempt me from much face-to-face contact with him. Unfortunately, of course, some contact is inevitable. "So," Greg sighed, easing his girth into the seat behind him, "why are we having this meeting?" I dropped my slender frame into the opposite chair. You called me in to have a meeting, Greg." He blinked, then sighed in disappointment. "You have a previously undocumented cryptid last week, which was sent to Shailene Mountain. Why was there an undocumented subject in your area?" I tried not to be condescending. Because, well, if we'd known where it was, then it wouldn't have been previously undocumented. All wild subjects has to be undocumented before we can discover them. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and disgust. "I realise that finding these subjects can be frightening, Lisa, but that's no excuse to let it affect your work," he sniffed. "And if you can't deal with this job, I'll find someone who can. Everybody else in your position is at least 5'8" and 160 pounds. My blood began to boil, but I'd learned long ago not to show any emotion in front of Greg. I forced a smile. "I can assure you that I wasn't afraid. If you read the reviews from the extraction team and the medical report from the missing boy who I found, everyone gave me glowing reviews." Greg slowly took off his glasses before leaning forward in his chair. "Lisa, I feel you are often a challenge to my authority." I learned to keep my mouth shut in these moments, but I'm sure my face was crimson. Greg sighed. "The subject that you picked up last week, all 167.72 kilograms of it, has been residing in the Shailene Mountains Environmental Niche Reptilian Program. It's several hundred acres of Colorado wilderness that's cleverly blockaded from any civilization entry." I nodded. "Thank you for explaining that, Greg, but I was the lead consultant in designing this particular ENRP." Greg scowled. "We've just got new orders from Washington," he explained gruffly. He tossed a stack of papers across the desk at me. "Doibu needs to clean out his ENRP of all undocumented subjects." I stared at him in confusion. "Clear out? Where do they go?" Greg shrugged. "Last week's subject has chromatically desirable object receptors. I think that's a phrase they used." My jaw dropped. "People like his eye colour." He stared back in contemplation. "When ground into a powder, it's apparently almost 3% less expensive than the lead-in black food colouring." I nearly leapt out of my chair. "You're going to kill him and take his eyes out. Why?" Greg sighed deeply. "The federal government's official position is that it doesn't exist." "What?" I spat. "Of course it exists." Greg shook his head. "The official position is that there's no concrete evidence one way or another. So there cannot be a policy that recognises the existence of the subjects contained within the ENRP at Shailene Mountain. Therefore, Doibu has been instructed to terminate all subjects therein." I closed my eyes and pulled several hairs out. "If your emotional condition prevents you from being able to complete your task, Lisa, there are stronger people who are capable." I controlled my breathing. It wasn't easy. "I'm absolutely fine, Greg. But you see that the order to dispose of something inherently implies that it exists." He blinked several times. "The official position is that they do not exist." I sighed. "Yes, Look, never mind. If they don't exist, why not simply release him back into the wild? Why are they going to kill him?" Greg gazed at me stoically. "They're not going to kill him," he said matter-of-factly. "You are." I stared back, slack-jawed. "Well, that wraps things up, Lisa." He shot a chip of voice. I stood up to walk away, shell-shocked. "You know, they really screwed up the name of our department," he explained, mostly to himself as I walked out the door. I turned back to see him brooding and grave. "They call it the Department of the Interior, but it only covers the outside stuff." I had been airlifted to Shailene Mountain in a daze. By the time I'd landed, though, my resolve had returned. Though Greg had come to us in a helicopter, I knew that he was outranked once we landed on the ground. "I'm not killing that cryptid," I explained to the man at the gate. I could tell that he was in charge, because everyone around him seemed to be afraid of him. He looked down at me. "Okay," he responded simply. I sputtered, "Yeah, well, so that's it." "Sure," he explained. "The only reason you were requested is because they wanted the subject to be euthanized humanely." He turned away from me to stare at the Colorado sky. I felt betrayed at this moment. "It would be a lot easier without that concern," the man continued, his hands clasped behind his back. "A 7mm Winchester ballistic silver tip to the thigh should cause death via hemorrhage within 24 hours. It's far less risky than the tranquilizer they suggested used before termination. Frankly, there's no telling how vicious this wild beast could get while they're men trying to put themselves at risk." 24 hours to die? That would be torture. You don't have to do that. He's not dangerous," I nearly shrieked. He glanced back. "Don't worry, he won't be a threat if everyone remains in the Jeep. Frankly, I'm glad to hear that you'll be staying out of harm's way. I don't think you realise what you'd be getting into with this monster. You better stay with Greg, where it's safe." My world span. I grabbed my head in my hands and walked away from the group. I focused on the crisp alpine air. I took in the 50-mile view of the wilderness. I thought about why I took this job in the first place. Then I returned to the people in charge. "I'll do it," I responded meekly. "Give me the tranquilizer gun and the rifle." I blinked away a rogue tear that I was determined not to let them see. "But I'll need a bag of red gummy bears to do things right." I bounced back and forth as the Jeep drove farther into the wilderness of the Shaolin Mountain ENRP. The rifle slid from side to side in my lap. "Did George love Lenny?" Mrs. Neese asked as she walked the rows of my 7th grade class. He shot Lenny in the head. Most people declare themselves unable to do that to a person they loved." She stopped pacing, and for reasons I'll never understand, she looked directly at me. But I'll have to ask most people a very specific question. If choosing not to kill someone is a result of your own discomfort, doesn't that mean you love yourself more than you love anyone else? Here she leaned in towards me and seemed to tune everyone else out. If your definition of love isn't completely sacrificing your own comfort, then how would you define it? My hands were too numb to tremble as I filled the bolt-action rifle with its deadly contents. I loaded the chamber with a decisive snap, then returned it to my lap. I had joined Doibu because I love the unknown parts of the world. Fear is power, but only to a certain few, and extracting fear is nothing different from extracting human potential. But sometimes the task of being human requires us to build impossible hope from nothing more than broken pieces. I am being forced to kill something that I love because I love it. That much of my humanity remains intact. I turned away from the rest of the people in the Jeep, so I didn't have to hide my tears. The vehicle plunged onwards, unabated, into the hidden forest with the futile goal of finding something more monstrous than what was already in it.